Hey guys, Julian here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make modern breakbeats in the style of Bicep and Raito. Now, before I start, I want to preface this and say I know those two artists are kind of different, but they do both use breakbeats, and they both do a really good job of kind of like updating them. I feel like a lot of times when you take like a breakbeat just from like an old jungle track, or even if you use like say an Amen break or a Think break straight from the original, it doesn't really have that like kind of crisp, like modern sort of I don't want to say digital sound, but like a more produced kind of like refined sound. And so today, that's what I'm going to be showing you how to do, how to sort of like refine breakbeats and like I said, give them that kind of like crisper, more modern feel. So as usual, I'm going to be giving away the project file and samples for free from this video in the description. And if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because it'll be available. And yeah, let's get started. So this is a loop you heard in the intro. The first sound we've got going on here, it's only 3 things, and then I've got them in a group with a bit of group processing. But the first sound we have here is this 909 hi-hat, which sounds like this. So what this is it's a hi-hat from the 909. It's this one. Very familiar sound if you've heard a lot of this kind of stuff. And yeah, all I did was I just brought it in here, and I brought it up +6 semitones. I like pitching it up because it kind of makes it a little bit like higher pitched like this. Kind of has a lot of mid-range, but I really just wanted this to be for like the sharp high end. So that's what I'm doing with this. Like I said, I just pitched it up. I shortened it a little bit with the envelope as well. And yeah, then after that, I've just got a bit of an EQ8 here, cutting out the low end, because with this sound, I'll show you. If I turn off this band, you will see it actually. There's like all of this stuff. All of that going on in the sound, and I didn't want that. So yeah, I just cut it out. And there we go. And like I said, all this is doing is it's just adding kind of like some sharp high end on top of the sound. Like that's something with using the old samples is they don't really have a lot of that like really high end stuff like around maybe here, like where I'm highlighting on the frequency spectrum there. So that's what this is adding. It's just kind of bringing that in. And then all I have that playing is just some 16th notes. Really nothing too crazy. It just kind of keeps going over and over like that. So then the next layer we have here is the actual breakbeat, which sounds like this. So the way I made this was by taking the Think break. If you don't know what the Think break is, you can actually get it for free in the description with the project file and samples from this video. But it's this break. It's a famous drum break. It was recorded by Lynn Collins, I believe. Yes, Lynn Collins. And yeah, it's just a drum break from the song that has like this really cool kind of vibe. It's used a lot in like jungle, drum and bass, rave music, all that kind of stuff. It was used a ton in the 90s, and now it's still used a lot. And yeah, so I have one of those, and what I've done is you can see I kind of chopped it up a little bit. So here's the original pattern. And then I took it here, and then you can see I've got this kind of pattern where it's like that. So, you know, that's another thing. Like, chopping up the breaks is a really, really good way to make them your own. Like, if you really want to give it, like, your own sound, try just doing a lot of different combinations of, like, chopped up break patterns. Like, it's really not that hard, too. What I like to do is just kind of work in eighth notes. So, you can see the grid here right now is on eighth notes. And, yeah, that's what I'm doing. Like, you can see, for example, that restarts there on that eighth note. And then, like, this restarts like that on that eighth note. And yeah, it's really not too crazy, but definitely like giving it your own kind of feel can really help to make it more interesting because, like, truth be told, a lot of times when I hear drum breaks, and I guess this one isn't super original, but they kind of use a lot of the same ways of like chopping them up. And yeah, I feel like if you kind of do like you try to do your own thing with it, you can come up with a lot of interesting stuff. But anyway, so then after that, I've got a bit of processing on it. So the first thing I've got here is this phaser, which is set like this. So what this phaser is doing is it's kind of helping to give it a little bit of a different, like, sort of texture. One problem that I find I have a lot when I try to work with old breaks is, like, I want to give it, like, a new kind of fresh texture or, like, a new kind of fresh sound, but still retain that old sound. And that can be very difficult if you're just working with, like, EQ and saturation and compression and stuff. But what I'm using this phaser for here is just to kind of introduce some weirdness, or I guess kind of like a different sonic flavor into it. So you can see, I've just got this in one place. I don't have the envelope or the LFO, so it's not being modulated. It's not like that usual phaser sound. It's not like that. I'm just using it like the same way you would use a filter, like just kind of setting it and leaving it there. And then what I've got here is I've got the pulls up to 6, and then I've turned the dry wet down a bit. So that's the key here, because this all the way up That's not really what we want, but if you blend that in with the original sound, like I said, it just kind of introduces a little bit of a different texture. Here's what it sounds like without this, and then with it. So yeah, it really helps to kind of give it like a more sort of futuristic sound. So then after that, I've got a bit of saturation. You can see I've turned up the drive there, and then I've got the wave shaper here for the color mode. So I'm using this to kind of like shape the waveform, for no pun intended there. But yeah, like I'm just kind of using it to like change it up a little bit more. Here's what it sounds like without this. It's still pretty dry even with the phaser, but then when we combine that with this, you can hear it gives it more texture, makes it a bit grittier, but it's like a grittiness that you can control. Like, this is exactly how I wanted this to sound. It's not like I just dropped some distortion on it. It's like, yeah, like I said, like this just gives you sort of more of like a detail-oriented approach, I guess. So then the other thing with this is I've got this damp over here. So what this does is it kind of works like a transient shaper. If I start turning this up more, you'll see. Like, you can kind of use it to shorten the sounds. This is really useful for these breaks because I think that's another thing. Like, you don't want them to be choppy necessarily, but they're just big, over-compressed breaks from, like, I guess from, like, 90s jungle music and drum and bass and stuff really aren't cutting it these days. Like, you kind of need your drums to be a bit tighter and a bit sharper. And so this is a really good way to do that. I only had it on 1%, actually, and it was actually doing quite a bit of, like I said, just kind of like some nice transient shaping without going, like, too hard. Here's what it sounds like without that. You can hear it sounds like a little bit, like, kind of big and sort of like out of control. I cannot talk today. But when we turn this up, even on just 1 or just 2%, you can hear already, like, it just makes it a bit tighter and kind of helps to, yeah, like I said, just refine it a little bit more. Like, the goal here is we're just trying to polish this into something a little bit more desirable than just that, which is just kind of boring and flat. And like I said, I mean, that's just the original break. Nothing really too interesting there. So then after that, I've got an EQ8. You can see I'm cutting out the low end a bit. I gave it a bit of a mid boost around 1K, and then I've got a high end boost as well. So the low end cut is really mostly just for this, because this kick is very bassy, which I'll talk about when I get to that. And also, like, I mean, you just don't want to have a lot of low end. Like, a lot of these old recordings, if you listen to this actually, you can hear, like, there's just a lot of low end in them. Like, sometimes it'll be just some low end kind of like humming in the background, or like even like with the kicks or the snares, there can just be a lot of low end. And also with the saturation and the phaser, that can add it as well. So I just wanted to cut that out and just kind of clean it up and make room for it. And also, like, if you were gonna put this in a track, you know, you wouldn't want to have all that low end in there because, you know, it would get in the way of like your bass and all your other low frequencies in the track. Then the mid boost is just kind of to bring out the snare a little bit more. Actually, if you listen to, I'll put it on the little headphone mode so you can kind of hear. This is about where the snare's punch is hitting. Like, you can hear that really like cracky part of it. So I've just kind of boosted that a little bit to kind of like bring that out a little bit more. And then I just have the high boost. So this is just kind of adding a little bit more of that crisp high end to it. I know this is already meant to do that, but I mean, you also want to bring it out with the original break as well, just to get that kind of nice, like, polished, more modern sound to it. So then after that, I've got a compressor side chaining into the kick, and that's really it for this think break. Like I said, the main keys here are just trying to like get in and take the sound and not necessarily like make something completely new out of it, but take it and make your own thing out of it. So then the kick is the next layer, which sounds like this. So what this is it's just an 808 kick. I brought it in here. Here's what it sounded like before I did anything to it. Just like a pretty standard 808 kick. And what I'm using this for is to kind of like, well, to use it as the kick for the break. This is a big thing, especially like in Bicep's music. I hear this. What you want to kind of do with these breaks is give them like the old school break sound, but then give them like a more modern polished sound, like I've been saying throughout this video. And there's a really, really good way to do this by essentially replacing the kick in the original break, because I sidechained the break to this kick, so when the kick plays, this isn't playing basically, or it's ducking out of the way. By replacing the original kick with this one, we just get so much more of like a nice like full sound out of it. Like, because this really doesn't have, I mean, I know I was saying a second ago it had like some low end, but this, like, the kick in this really doesn't have that like deep kind of low end. Like, it's really more of like a punchy, like 100 hertz style kick. So yeah, this just really helps to add something like that into it. And definitely, like, when you hear this in a track combined with the breakbeats, like, you immediately know this was probably made in the 2010s. Because, yeah, like I said, it just has a very modern and clean kind of production sound. So, the way I did this was, like I said, it's just an 808 kick. And what I did was I brought it into the sampler here, and then or simpler, I guess I should say. But what I did with that was I shortened it with the amplitude envelope like this. So I turned the sustain down, kind of shortened the decay a little bit, because obviously this 808 is very long. And then I added a bit of a pitch envelope onto it. So the pitch envelope, if you don't know how that works, it's just kind of like adding like an envelope very similar to an amplitude envelope, but on the pitch. So what you're doing is you're just going from a high point to a low point. In this case, just back to the original pitch. Very quickly, and then this creates that kind of like impact at the start of the sound. If I turn this off, you can hear it doesn't really punch through quite as much. And it's not really like hitting us hard, but when we add this, yeah, it just really gives it like a more punchy kind of sound. So it's a good way to kind of take an 808 and do your own thing with it. So then on the group, I've got a bit of processing as well. So the first thing I've got here is this glue compressor, which is set up like this. So what I've got going on here is it's actually not really doing too much. Let me show you what this sounds like without any processing. So you can hear it's a bit flat, or it's like kind of, it just sounds kind of like dead. So I have this compressor on here, which is just giving a little bit of compression. It's not kicking in a whole lot. But you can hear it's kind of helping to glue everything together, no pun intended. So the key with this is just not going too hard with the threshold. Again, we really don't want a lot of compression. We just want that little bit to kind of tie it all together. And then I've also got the attack and the release up. So the way these work is basically the release is like how long the compression will go for, and then the attack is how long until it kicks in. So I have this turned up a little bit so that basically it won't hit on the transient. The transient is just like the very start of each drum sound. Like it's literally this thing in this 808 here, for example. It's just like that very, very like first hit at the start of the sound. And if you have too much compression, you can kind of lose that, and that's when it starts to really sound flat. Like you don't really get a very dynamic sound because the drums are just starting at one volume and ending at the same volume. Like they don't really, it's not dynamic like the way a drum is. So that's why I have this attack here. Is basically just to kind of like get it out of the way at the start of the hit, so we can still hear those nice transients. But we also still get the compression on the rest of the sound. And then with the release, I just kind of have that up. I just kind of wanted it to compress like the whole sound, I guess, to the end. I didn't really have too much of an issue with that, so I just turned that up a little bit. So then after that, I've got a drum bus on here, which sounds like this. So basically all this is doing is I'm just using the drive a little bit to kind of give this a bit more like crunch, I guess you could say. This also helps to glue everything together. Like this is, you could also use like some saturation here, or even like an overdrive if you wanted to really finesse it. But yeah, I'm just using this to kind of put everything under that same like crunchy umbrella, so to speak. Like if you put everything under the same processing, it'll help to glue it all together and make it all sound like one thing, because like I said, you're putting it under an umbrella. Like when you put the same processing on everything, you're doing the same thing to everything, and it's gonna, even if they're completely different sounds, it's gonna get at least a little bit more kind of close sonically if you do stuff like this. So then after that, the final effect I have here is just this EQ8, boosting a bit more high-end. I know I've done a lot of high-end boosting throughout this video, but yeah, this is just to give it that extra little bit of like polish on top. Here's what it sounds like without it, and then with it. So you can hear, yeah, it's just like that extra little, like 5 to 10% that I feel like really helps to kind of tie it all together. So that's pretty much it for this one. I got a bunch of requests for this one, and I figured what better time than now. So I hope you guys enjoyed. So as usual, you can get the project file and samples from this video in the description for free. Make sure to check that out. And if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because they'll be available. Make sure to like this video as well as subscribe, and let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Thank you so much, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.